Andrew Reiner, what did you score Final Fantasy 15?
8.5 out of 10.
It seemed like Miller played a lot of the game before. We talked about it on this podcast a couple weeks ago. He was cautiously optimistic, I think it's fair to say. And I was like, okay, I'm going to play all this. This is good. Then as you started this review, Reiner, there was a lot of walking back into the bullpen and saying, I don't know about this. I don't know about this. And just to the point where I had written it off completely, like, it's sad. I guess I just won't play 15 because Reiner seems to be the mini Conan O'Brien storming around the office talking about what a disaster it is. And then the review comes out and you gave it an 8.5.
Yeah, so I don't do these walks often where I'm like perplexed by a game. I mean, I walk around the office to see what you guys yahoos are working on, all that stuff. But it's just points where I'm like, something will happen and I'll just put the controller down and just be like, what is going on? Like, it's breaking my brain. So I'll just kind of walk around the office and talk through it with other people.
Story-wise? Systems-wise?
Systems-wise. In particular, we're starting on a very negative note, by the way, but for a game that I gave an 8.5, but the car. The car is the reason I was walking around. We'll leave it at that. How about that? We'll get back to it in a bit.
Okay.
The car. I hate that thing.
Naturally.
Like, it is baffling. Like, I think I
we
use
can
that
start
word.
out negative. We're going to get to the wide range of
Sure.
the Final Fantasy 15 spectrum. Joe, you mentioned that the car changed from when we played it in Japan.
Right. So from what I remember what we played in Japan, our controls, like the control of it was still a little limited, but you had at least the opportunity to go off-road.
It like pulled you gravitationally towards the road, but you could totally go off-road.
Right. And like you can't anymore. It's like you are on the road, and even though you can sort of control what lane you're in and you control like where you turn and how fast you're going, you don't really have
fast is 50 miles an hour tops.
Yeah.
60 with an upgrade.
Those cops are brutal in
Oh man.
Narnia. Where's this game?
Okay, you control your acceleration and deceleration.
Okay.
And where you turn, but for the most part, the car is more of like an on rails sort of experience.
Like if you hit turn, it auto turns. You are not controlling that turn.
Yeah, it feels like a really long theme park ride, like especially when you have to go across the map.
Well, that's the thing. That's your main beef then, Reiner, right? Is just spend so much time in that car?
Yeah, and it's like, picture like Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, the countryside, where there's like two paths through that area, right? There's it's not a city where there's blocks everywhere where you can turn or go wherever. There aren't a lot of roads in this game. So they want you to, like, I get the design. They want you to feel like you're on this road trip. You're hanging in this car with your friends. They don't really talk to each other a lot in the car, which I anticipated. Like, if I was designing that game, it would have been like, we got to make sure, like, for 10-minute rides, for 5-minute rides, for 3-minute rides, we have a ton of dialogue and we could just cycle those in, just random things they could be talking about. But they don't. Instead, Gladiolus will be in the backseat reading a book. That's what you see. And it's basically, the game's basically telling you, like, hey, do something else.
I mean,
because, like, yes, the first time through, you're like soaking in the environment. Oh, look, that crystal's cool. The sightline's really nice. Oh, look at that weird rock structure. The second time, you're like, there's that crystal again.
Yeah, it's really funny that you say that because earlier I've been playing it at work today a bit, and there was a ride that was 5 minutes long through the same place I'd already been. So while I was doing that, I just took off my headphones and started like checking my email and setting up appointments and stuff while the game kept going in the background.
Well, pro tip from the developers, they recommend that you play the Final Fantasy 15 spin-off iPhone games while driving around in the car.
Sure.
I remember that specifically from the visit. But.
See, and for me, I think that this actually didn't bother me as much as it bothered Reiner and some other people out there, but I think that the lack of conversation in the car is really the big problem. Like I would not mind taking these longer car rides through places that I'd seen already if I was getting new content from the characters, you know, like if I was getting more insight into like their backstories or even just like their relationships, or it wouldn't even have to be that deep. I mean, just if they had more varied dumb interactions about, like, I don't know, some guy lets one rip in the back seat and everyone's like, oh, come on.
Or 99 bottles of beer on the wall every time you're in the car.
You know, just something to like fill that space, because I think when you add in the length of some of the rides and just the sort of like barren, landscape, both orally and visually, then it gets to be a problem.
But orally, you can pipe in some classic tracks from Final Fantasy, right?
Oh, and I love it.
That seems really cool.
Although the one thing, as great as it is you have all these classic tracks to listen to from all these classic Final Fantasy games. If you pick a song, the next time you get in that car, it's going to be on that song again. They have no randomization system in there.
Yeah, they do. There's a shuffle.
Well, you could shuffle, but if you don't do that, if you have the track set, you get back in the car, it's going to start that track again.
Okay, that seems pretty nitpicky, Reiner.
Yeah,
Hey, I'm just saying, like, again, it's a weird thing. Like, Grand Theft Auto, you get in the car, it just picks a random station for the random car, whatever,
Right,
and it
right.
goes where.
But this isn't a radio. This is
No,
like a
but-
playlist.
yeah, but
and-
it's
and
like
for
at
me,
least
like, when
pick it
I-
up at the end of where my song was. Then
It's on the Final Fantasy VIII track.
The other, I don't know, like for me, when I think about a game like when I play Grand Theft Auto, for instance, even though in a game like that, it gives you full control over the car, you still have 5-minute rides where you need to go from
Sure.
point A to point B, where all the, like, you're maybe hitting some pedestrians or some, street lights or something along the way. But for the most part, like that, the experience of driving from point A to point B in the GTA game is also, in my opinion, like is also sort of similarly, like uneventful, except you get to say that you're directly controlling.
well,
Which is
The-
important.
Which
Well-
is a big thing.
you are directly controlling it, but they've also thought about like even that isn't enough. Where they have for a lot of points in missions in Grand Theft Auto from point A to point B, they will have dialogue that takes place that entire time, and if you screw up, they will have a different dialogue
Yeah.
strain, sometimes 3 different ones. People may never even see that, but they're so worried about people getting bored in that moment.
Yeah.
Well,
And I
let's-
guess real quick, I wanted to bring that up. Just like, I'm not saying that the way Final Fantasy 15 does it is like the best or the right way. Because like, I mean, I acknowledge like, yes, that like they could be doing that better. But to me, it's not this like, it's not some horrible misstep that like kills the momentum of the game for me. It's like I get there and it's like, I wish they would have done this better. But for the most part, I don't mind the car ride. So
Well, let's head off YouTube commenters at the pass here, which is all I think about now when recording this podcast. What is the best thing about Final Fantasy 15? Let's go from the worst to the best.
Okay, so yeah, the villain is the car, the regalia. That's the villain
Don't
of the
spoil
game.
the ending. What are you
sorry.
doing?
Yeah, it transforms into a mech. No, it's the best part is the time you spend with your friends in the game, like your party. Those 4 characters, Noctis, Prompto, Ignis, and Gladiolus. The chemistry they develop on this journey, even if they aren't talking to each other in the car, there is so much relationship building in this game and character dynamics, and you get to know them, their past. There'll be moments where you'll be doing something and all of a sudden Prompto will be like, hey, Noctis, hold on, you got a second? And you'll just be like, oh, we're having a conversation. And you get some choice in how you're dealing with them. Like you kind of dictate like, am I a dick or do I like this guy? But in those moments, you really get to know him. Like, whoa, he's got some baggage. Like there's some things here, and then also you get to know them on their interests. This is something you rarely see in games. Is like Prompto's really into photography, and that comes up throughout the entire game where he is photojournaling your entire quest to marry the Lady Luna, right?
Mm-hmm.
And anytime you go to rest at night, you see all the photos he's taken that day.
And I'm interested, like, I still haven't figured out, maybe Joe, if they're randomized. Like, obviously some of them are not, but like, there'll be pictures from battles that look like, oh, this is just a random screenshot that Prompto was positioned here and took a battle of. Like, some of them are obviously staged, especially like mission-specific ones. But, if they have a mix of that in there, that is super cool.
Yeah, because there will be times where like a tree is blanketing the screen, so all I see is digitized, really pixelated leaves. It's like, nice shot, Jack.
Yeah.
we saw one when we were recording a video yesterday of, I think, of like Gladio with his face practically like up a Garula's butt. He was like so close to it. So it's like, yeah, there's some funny.
But you get to learn why he's so into Gorilla's butts.
But it's things like that. And then Ignis is really into cooking. And anytime he sees someone like at a diner eating something new, he's like, whoa,
New
stop
recipe.
the presses, new recipe. I'm going to make this for you guys. It's going to be amazing.
My favorite moment so far was actually at a diner where we had fries. Like, that's it. Just basic fries with ketchup, and suddenly Ignis just breaks out his notebook. He's like, I gotta write this shit down. It's like,
Fries
really?
with ketchup.
Fries? All right. But yeah, like that was the moment that I really, it's pretty fascinating to me how quickly I went from, all right, this is kind of cool, to I love these characters. Like, it's pretty much like the first time you set up camp. It is really weird for like a AAA game to have like all these animations and stuff dedicated to a bunch of dudes like setting up camp, because it's like a 1.5 minute sequence of them propping a tent, starting a fire, getting ready, cooking some stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just really cool.
And is it just the overall concept of getting to know these 4 people so well, or is it specifically you think the writing really carries through?
I think it's both.
Yeah, it's both.
Yeah.
Really?
So
Wow.
far. Yeah.
Yeah, Prompto, I would say is he's a little high strung, he's a little over the top, annoying, but it's kind of like Titus in 10, where you're like, ugh, who is this guy? But by the end of the game, you're like, I love that guy. You
I'm
know,
glad
like,
that whiny wiener's dead.
And it's like, it's not even just Prompto. Like, all of them are annoying in their own way. But, they're also, this is what makes them feel like real people in a way, is like, they have, their good sides and their bad sides. Like, Ignis is, he's super annoying. Like a lot of the time, because he's got that butler thing going on, but he also makes you food.
Yeah,
He's
he
got
reminds me of you, actually.
Oh.
Well, there we go. There we
How
go.
so?
Tone.
Yeah.
It's the same tone.
A deep tone?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got that voice. I can
And you're kind of like our office butler.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I bring you like hors d'oeuvres all the time to your desk.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
Also on this front too, I think it's like, I think the writing is good, but I think they also use these opportunities, like it's not actually writing in which some of the character personalities come out. Like Reiner mentioned, like Gladio pulling out a book. He's like the big muscle bound guy, like he's the warrior. And yet when you're on long car rides, he's the one who's just like, sitting there and like pulling out a book. That adds, it's like, they don't make a big deal out of it, but it's just a thing that you see that adds a little bit of like dimension to him. Or things like, let's say like Noctis is like, oh, about to fall off a cliff or something. And like, who's the one who's like there to grab him as he's about to fall? That's Gladio. So it sort of establishes it, like in ways like that, they establish him as the protector sort of character without him being like, hello, Noct, I'm your protector. I'll do that for you because I'm your protector. It's like, they don't need to be so explicit. They do a lot with just like, showing and not telling. Too.
It's like Steiner, except with more depth.
And it gets to a point where they start shuffling in different side characters that help out, or one of your characters might leave, and you feel like separation at that moment. Or like if there's someone else with you, like a fifth wheel, you're like,
get out
here, we got this.
Yeah, I just got to a point where a character shuffled in, and I'm like, I really don't like you. You're messing up our vibe here.
I didn't know they did that.
Yeah.
Is it a big thing? Are you battling with 5 people?
Yeah.
Wow.
There are a few parts, yeah.
Joe, how much have you played so far?
It's hard to gauge. I'm about 22 hours into it, but story-wise, I'm not super far because I dug really deep into side quests and stuff as soon as the world opened up.
So you knew so much about this game going into it. What surprised you, Joe, about what you've played so far?
Boy, I mean, for me, the big unknown was the character stuff that we've been talking about. So I mean, I'd have to stand with that probably as being sort of like my favorite or the most impressive part. But I think beyond that, I was a little worried about the combat system.
Yeah.
As someone who, I mean, I've always appreciated the Final Fantasy approach that, I mean, even in like the 13 games where there's a real time element to it, it's still largely, there's still a big strategic part also. And like, this feels like it goes a lot more towards just like a straight up action angle on it, like instead of looking at an enemy and being like, oh, they're weak to fire, so then you're going to like scroll through your things and choose fire. It's like, you can find out that an enemy's weak to fire, but they might also just be like weak to broadswords instead of daggers or something. So it's all about, so you're switching to the like those weaknesses on the fly and like going in and like trying to get behind them and like hook up as many like back attacks as you can. You're commanding your
link attacks,
yeah, the link attacks. You're commanding your party members. There's this meter in the corner that like fills up, and when you get like a bar, you can command one of your allies to do an attack. And then they eventually learn attacks that take, more than 1 bar out of it. But it fills up quickly enough that it's not a thing like Wrath of the Gods in God of War, where it's like once every few battles you're doing. I mean, we're talking multiple times per fight. You're saying like, Prompto, shoot a gravity ball over there. Gladio, do a big like swipe with your sword. And these are like animations that just sort of like interrupt combat and get in there and, it changes up the dynamic.
It seems weird. It seems like you're saying it's so different from the normal Final Fantasy turn-based system, but it's a good thing because there's so much to do. Doesn't that seem like the opposite end of the spectrum?
It actually feels like a weird amalgamation of the two, where you still feel like you have the little details in the turn-based stuff where it's like, okay, I'm going to heal now. Okay, he's going to get an elixir. Okay, now we're going to time in 2 seconds. I'm going to unleash Gladio's big attack, sword attack to take these guys down. Then I'm going to come in with a Link as he's down. Like you feel like you're still strategizing at a really high level, but at the same time, you feel like you're playing like a Devil May Cry or God of War because it's really twitchy. You're doing a lot of evasive action.
Yeah.
Not just switching up weapons, but you're always rolling. You're always trying to get a counter set up. And that's all Twitch time-based reflex stuff.
Yeah, I was actually super impressed with it because I didn't play any of the mini demos they released of this. So I was going into this fresh, and it seemed really intimidating at first, that combat system. The first time you get in there, and it's like, oh, this is reflex-based.
Yeah.
And I have to memorize all these systems, but it's also one of those systems where you just adapt quickly. It's really easy to slide into and physically know what you need to do, where you need to be.
And it's also, it's good at being like it's very chaotic when you first start, I feel like, but it's also not so demanding. It's not so hard at the beginning. So even though there's a lot of like chaos going on, it gives you enough opportunity to sort of make sense out of it. And like, okay, why are these things happening the way they are? When are these happening? So by the time that, you know, the sort of, I feel like the combat like kicks in and sort of expects more of you, you don't learn it all. There is a tutorial, but you don't learn it through tutorial. You just sort of learn by like jumping into the deep end and figuring it out.
It seems complicated. Were you turned off by it for a while, Reiner?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that was my favorite part right out of the gates. You know, it was the car, the flat tires on that bastard. But the combat right away, I was like, okay, there's something really special going on here. Like, this is neat. It feels good. Like, it's not, you know, there is a bit of glue when you're doing your attack and it kind of pulls you into an enemy, but at the same time, it's very range-based too.
Right.
Like you're going to get different weapons that just on the fly, you're switching like, okay, now I need to be 2 meters away, or this one I can do from 4, or this one's my long range. Like you're really kind of mixing that in with all these other strategies.
Yeah, it's very combo driven is what it feels like. Yeah.
And
go ahead. Sorry.
No.
Yeah, I was, I don't know. I've always been JRPGs are not my favorite genre. It's a genre I have a pretty strong apathy towards. I've played like 3 Final Fantasies to completion. So
That's pretty good.
Yeah, and I feel like the reason that gets in, I feel like the battle systems in those games often get in the way of that. Like I just do not love like the menu based battle system of, you know, send out an attack, wait for everyone to take their turn. Like that's just not my thing. So this battle system is one of the big reasons like I'm really into this game. Like I stayed up till 5 a.m. playing it. Like I'm really digging it so far.
Wow. And Ben, you said like what I wanted to say is like it sounds complicated when we're here like trying to describe it in words, but like really it's not that hard once you're actually into it. I mean, it's really just a question of like finding the right weapon to attack your enemy with, trying to get your position right, and dodging when the you know when you can.
I mean, seriously, think God of War. You know, like
really
all those different weapons when Kratos has those, it's very similar to that.
Right.
But with a lot of RPG undertones kind of guiding it.
And
right?
I saw some people talking about, or I think even on the podcast we talked about, like fighting inside can be a mess and the camera can be a mess in combat at times. Is it that much of a hassle or just not great?
It's not, for me, it's not great. Like sometimes the camera will get stuck, especially when characters do link attacks. Like the camera will actually get stuck there for a second after the link attack is done and you're trying to move around.
Yep.
But on the whole, you know, it's not like awful. It's not terrible.
There'll be things they don't do like the translucent environments like trees or walls or stuff. So every once in a while you'll just have like prompto shots show like trees blanketing your view and you're just like, I'm killing an enemy. I haven't seen it yet. I'm trying to switch the camera.
Oh, it was Gladio the whole time. Oh, God.
Every angle is like more brush and trees. So there are points in the environment that, you know, you start thinking of games like Witcher. It's like, oh, the tree canopy is really tall there. This one, it's right on the ground. You know, the brush is just thick right off the ground. So it's like, okay, that's a mistake. But it's not like game ending. You're not going to throw your controller down and be like, this is it. You'll get through it.
Yeah.
Right.
It has never been bad at crucial moments or long enough to make a real difference, other than just like, I mean, yeah, like they said, just sort of like, come on.
Yeah. So one of the interesting bits of feedback I heard you raving about in the office, Reiner, is you said that it has a simple plot.
Yeah. I think, you know, Final Fantasy 13, I played that and I was like, wow, there's a lot to this. And then like loading screens would come up and they would be a summary of the story. And I was like, oh, that's what's going on. Like there's points in that game that just, I mean, I followed it closely. It just didn't spell out until you had it smack dab in front of you.
My
Them
favorite-
telling you.
My favorite bit of 13 lore is when they announced 13.2 and we got a press release about it, and it said, Final Fantasy 13.2 finally solves the prime mystery from Final Fantasy 13. Is Lightning happy? And everyone's like, what? That's what that game was about? Okay.
There were way bigger questions about that than whether Lightning was
Yeah, I
happy.
remember my best friend playing Final Fantasy 13 in college and just watching him and not being able to make heads or tails of the story. And so when 15 was announced and, you know, we were seeing footage of it, I really liked the idea of it, but at the same time, I was super nervous about it being overcomplicated because I just do not have time for overcomplicated JRPG plots.
I mean, they have 10 years to soak in their own lore. Like, it's so easy just to assume everyone knows all this stuff.
So, like, the simple plot, like, built on these sort of archetype characters who are
Mm-hmm.
lovable, and also this whole thing about, well, here's a prince trying to earn his throne and reclaim his kingdom. You know, that's pretty basic stuff that's also, it resonates, I feel.
Here's where I think the big difference is like 13 had this ridiculously deep lore fleshed out world that you needed to understand for certain story beats to make sense.
Right.
Like there was an expectation put on you as a player to dive through these like or not tutorials, but like menu screens to read this like really sort of obtuse stuff and like try and make heads or tails of it. And then, and only then, does like what happens in the story really sort of feel satisfying. Whereas I think FF15 still has a very fleshed out characters, a very fleshed out world, but they don't put the burden on you to understand. You can understand what's happening. You can understand the characters and their relationships just by diving in. But if you want to watch the anime, you'll have a better understanding of like how these four friends like know each other and what their relationships are like. If you want to watch Kingsglaive, you'll have a better understanding of like King Regis and Luna and what happened in the City of Insomnia. Like it supports all that. But and I know like whenever any like cross media stuff happens, the companies always say, "Oh, well, we want it to support the core content, but not be required." And that rarely happens. And I think they did it this time.
Go ahead.
When I found out I was doing the review, like Joe and I have been talking about it for months, and it was like, okay, I should watch Kingsglaive, and then it was like, no, I shouldn't.
Yeah.
I should play the game first. So that's what I ended up doing, is getting the impressions of just the lore or the story without any of this extra stuff on the side. So I followed it perfectly. Like I had no problems. It was so simple. Like JV said, it is just about this thing happens. I don't want to give away any plot points, but it's like you gotta like get your kingdom back.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because I did not care about watching that CGI movie at all until I played this game, and now I definitely want to go watch it. There's this awkward point where it feels like there's a cutscene that plays like 2 hours in that I'm pretty sure
Is from
it's
the movie.
from the movie, and
Yeah.
it
Really?
doesn't fit that well into it. It's like, this is totally from that CGI movie.
So
Yeah.
it's like some pivotal points from
It's
the
a huge
movie
point.
that,
Yeah.
okay.
It's not putting it as a cutscene isn't exactly right. There's a point in which in the game someone is describing to Noctis something that happened in the movie.
Okay.
And what they do, so they keep the sort of voice of like they keep what's happening in the present, but they're sort of showing a flashback to what happened, and that is from Kingsglaive. So you just see the visual from the
Interesting.
movie.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in that moment, like Noctis, he doesn't really emote a lot. He's kind of a blank slate of a character. And I was just kind of like, man, that scene was botched.
Mm-hmm.
But as the game goes on, you kind of learn that's intentional. I'll leave it at that. I won't go into too much, but there are reasons why Noctis is the way he is, and people should just play the game to see where he goes as a character.
So I feel like we're hitting the story is simple note a lot, but would you describe it as a good story, great story?
I think it's a good story for what they're not doing anything daring with their storytelling, right?
Okay.
There are some big reveals of certain characters pulling the strings and stuff like that are interesting and well done, I think, and some interesting characters on the side that I think are really well developed, as good as the core cast, but they're not doing anything crazy with it. It is a fine story. It's engaging. You want to see Noctis get to that point and see what happens, right?
Goodbye, Noctis in a coma theory is what I'm reading when you say that.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
No, there's some cool stuff and some big moments. Like they like scale in this game. That's one thing I'll say is I don't want to give away too much. You guys saw the Titan, obviously the summon that you eventually get. That's a huge scale. They showed that at E3. They play up stuff like that a lot in this game, and it's very cool visually and how it affects the world.
I love it too when you're just like driving around and all of a sudden there's like some enormous monster that's just like, oh, that monster lives there. It's like, I'm not going there. That thing is huge. I mean, like there's things
Somebody
that are
call
huge.
Geralt. Yeah, pass.
Or I mean, well, we saw it in the episode Dust Guy demo too. That's like the what do you call it? Catoblepus? The big
No one will call you on that. Absolutely.
whatever.
Yeah.
There's like that giant thing in the marsh, and like oh, we did a feature on that thing even in for our cover story, and like that's still there. And you walk up to it, and it's just like it's just massive. And seeing that kind of stuff is
I fished near those guys.
Yeah,
caught a bass.
Oh man, I love how much Noctis loves fishing too.
It's really cute.
Yeah.
I like that the fishing tutorial. Minor spoiler: the fishing tutorial is presented as, "Hey, there's this hungry cat. You need to prepare a meal for it."
Oh gosh.
So you go catch a fish, and then you have to then you take it to a chef who's like, "There's this cat that's hungry. Will you please cook this fish for it?"
The cat doesn't care.
Yeah, I've trained for dozens of years as a professional chef. I have a better use of my time than feeding a stray
The cat's
cat,
probably
so-
like, bring it to me live. Like part of what I love is killing it, and then I'll eat it. But on that note of the cat, but no, what they do with the side content, it's very separate from the story. And I think that's where, again, the story succeeds, is you don't have like stuff branching off of it. All these side activities are very individual, like on their own, will never intersect. It's like, go catch frogs.
So on that front, as about side activities, everything, Phil Kohler, who used to be a Game Informer over at Polygon, he described this game in a positive way, but he described it as a mess. And I'm curious about that. That's actually kind of exciting to me, that it's just this weird hodgepodge collection of systems, and it ultimately is great, but it's rickety. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Like it feels like a game that's I mean, again, I'm less than 10 hours into it, but so far it feels like a game that's bursting at the seams with like ideas, and some of them aren't implemented that well, like the car. But there's just so much weird stuff in it. Like it's constantly exciting. Like it's around every corner. There is something new that is odd or peculiar in an interesting way.
On a systems level.
I'd say.
As I put it to Joe, it reminds me of playing Grand Theft Auto 3 for the first time, in that it is like they are trying some really new, daring stuff. They're not trying to replicate a lot of open world stuff. They're trying their own thing. They're doing this road trip. Part of the game is open world. A third of the game is completely linear. You just don't see that kind of stuff in these games. Like, they really take some chances and they fumble a lot of that stuff. But at the same time, there's something really unique here.
I don't get it. So I've heard you can make this comparison to Grand Theft Auto 3. Like that's one of like the top 5 most innovative games of all time.
Yeah.
And so I
They
don't
are
understand
trying something new in the RPG
What
space.
is it? I mean, they've done open worlds. Is just a combination of the open world with then shifting to a linear format?
No,
or?
just everything they attempt here. Like we talked about combat meshing with RPG conventions, how they even handle the open world of trying to make you feel like you're on this big long road trip. Those things are cool in concept and in the storytelling context really work, but on the gameplay end they don't. Whereas there's so much here, like the big boss battle. Again, I don't want to go into too much stuff, but there are some big moments in this game that, like JV said, that are a whole new idea that's just thrown at you, and you're just like living in the moment going, holy crap, that just happened. But it's kind of, again, janky a little bit.
Right.
It looks amazing. It's spectacular, but they try so much new stuff. And I really appreciate this about this game, that they're not just like, this works, let's do it. Gamers like this. They didn't have a checkbox, a checklist of just marking them off, like, make sure we have this. They really tried something new. And that's where I think it feels like Grand Theft Auto, where like, hey, let's bring this top-down experience. Let's really try to flesh it out in a big way.
Yeah, it feels, because we talked about another game that tries new things, like Mafia 3, but Mafia 3 tries new things in an old box, and it doesn't work because all of the stuff that's old feels like a game from like nearly 2 decades ago.
Right.
It's just like so old. But here, it feels like everything is new or trying something new. Like nearly everything you're going to do feels newish or has like a new perspective to it.
And that's why I hope, like Rockstar, they can come back. I hope they keep this foundation, not necessarily just make another 15-2 or
You mean
whatever.
Square?
Yeah, but Square comes back like Rockstar does with the Grand Theft Autos. Get another chance. You saw where that series went and evolved. Man, if they kept working on this formula, it could be incredible.
I mean,
okay, here,
please, Joe.
I thought of a way that I can explain this to you, and that's like, when we were on that cover trip,
Uh-huh.
they did a lot of talking about like trying to like discard their pride a little bit. Like as a studio, Square-Enix and the Final Fantasy team, they feel like it felt like some of the ways that the series had gone wrong was by like them as a company assuming that they knew better than fans as far as like what is Final Fantasy, what do people want?
Yeah.
And that I guess that's another instance where I feel like they actually pulled that off in the sense like you play this game and the willingness to deviate from what Final Fantasy has always been and what people always expect from it, to just sort of like throw in is like, hey, let's see if like, hey, let's put a car in here. A car has never been like a major part of Final Fantasy, but like that's what we want this to be. And even if the trips feel a little long, I mean, I'm sure that there's also a sort of like balancing there. It's like, well, the trips are long and that's going to bother some people, but it also really like hits home this idea of like a road trip and these people like bonding over time.
But
so
no
we're gonna
fans
keep
were
it in there.
asking for it, something like a car. So
Well, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you do exactly what the fans are asking. What I'm saying is it felt like some of the overconfidence that I think led to games like the Final Fantasy 13 games, where it's just like, well, we know what makes a good Final Fantasy. It's this blank, and you know it's been tested over years. This is what we're going to do.
just trying new stuff again.
Yeah. So it feels again. I guess I don't feel like Reiner does that. Every step of the way felt like some big innovation.
Well, that's what he said.
Well, okay. I mean, like to me, it doesn't. As a whole, it feels innovative. Like putting all of these pieces together in the way that they are assembled is new. But like, yeah, it's not new to have an open world. It's not new to put your characters in a car. It's not new to have side quests all over the place. But just like the ratios, the way that it's all assembled and under the Final Fantasy banner.
And how they approach it. You know, like that whole road trip concept. Would it work if you controlled the car? I don't know. You know, like that's just something we wouldn't know. But yeah, it just has such a unique thing. And it's baffling at times where you're just like, why can I fast travel here, but I can't fast travel there? Like, what is your logic here?
Yeah.
There's just certain things in this game where you're just like, there's a instantly warp to the car option, but if you're in a dungeon, you have to warp to the beginning of the dungeon first, and then from there, you got to warp to the car. And it's like, why not just give me the car option there? Because you know what I'm going to do. Like,
it reminds me a little bit of like, not to say this is just a Japanese thing, but I think studios going for an open world for the first time, like of Metal Gear Solid 5, and people that are used to open world games are like, this is just a little bit different and a little bit quirky and strange, and then trying new things in there. Is that a fair analogy at all, Joe?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, another thing, especially with the car driving around, is that like I get vibes of Deadly Premonition from this.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
In that, and again, like I love Deadly Premonition, by the way. So that's supposed to be a favorable comparison. In that, like, you know, there are just some sort of like, you have some important thing you should be doing, but at the same time, like, hey, I'm gonna go do this like weird side quest for someone over here, and like then you drive to the other part of the map and you do it, and you know, and there are also weird things that like, oh man, I really wish I could just zoom out on the map and like see where all of my quests are.
you can't do that.
No, you have to go through your quest list, and then it's like this quest is here. Scroll. This quest is there. It's like, just let me see where everything I can pick up and turn in is.
There are times where I'll be like, okay, I want to do this mission, but it's a 10-minute, I kid you not, 10-minute car ride that I can't fast travel to. So let me see. If I fast travel to this mission point, that'll only make that ride maybe 4 minutes.
Yeah, it's really
so then I'll
weird.
fast travel there and it's like a minute load, so I cut the time in half. But it's like the moment I start thinking that, someone on that dev team has to be thinking that thing too. And at that point, the brakes got to be put on it and it needs to change. And if they have fast travel, patch that sucker in. Make every option fast travel. If people want to experience the game the way you want it to be, then you never should have put that damn fast travel in. But since you put it there, put it on everything.
Right.
So it's a personality-soaked, lovable, janky mess of a good game.
Yes.
I wouldn't say it's a mess of a game. I mean, I
Okay.
think it's
It
very
feels
well
like a
made.
mess.
It's a lot of ideas, but
Right.
I
That's
do
what I mean.
think like I feel a really strong connection to this world,
Wow.
and
Okay.
I want to be a part of that. Like I think that it succeeds in that capacity very well. But there's just some things that just don't work as well and baffling.
Well,
That's the word I put on it. It's
Like,
baffling at
It's
times.
brimming with creativity, but there's a lack of polish, like everywhere, pretty much.
Weird. So there was a certain moment, Reiner, in your daily walk into the bullpen to have some new bombastic thing to say about 2015, where you're like, there's a thing in this game that is the dumbest thing of all time.
Yeah.
The dumbest thing in recorded history of human beings.
Yeah,
That's
it
too
is
much
dumb.
of a spoiler. We
I
can't
know,
talk about
but
that.
is there any way you can... Is it a detriment to the game? Or
It's
what
just
the
it's
hell
just
is
like,
this that you were talking about?
It's an idea that their story goes some crazy places and things get messed up and there's points you can't return to. Yet they realize in development, like, they need to return.
Okay.
How do we solve that problem? And that's what they do. And it is just like, well, if you're doing that, why not do this and this? And it becomes
It's a weird story
It's a
conceit.
weird-
It's
yeah.
a weird story conceit to accommodate a gameplay necessity.
Okay, thank you. That is exactly the framing that I was looking for.
it doesn't. Yeah, it throws a lot of kinks in their lore and their basic logic they're using in their world.
What a weird thing. We should
It's not a mess. It's busy.
busy. Okay, there's a
busy.
great word. Okay. I'm really looking forward to this.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it has exceeded a lot of people's expectations.
And I'll say this again: like, a lot of people wrote me saying, "Do I have to know Final Fantasy to get into this?"
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. This is a full standalone thing. You might not get some of the jokes of like certain characters you meet. Sid. I'll take Sid for an example. You see Sid, and you're like, "Oh, that's their version of Sid." You're not going to know about the other 14 versions of him or whatever.
Uh-huh.
That's all you're missing. The
Right.
nostalgia,
Right,
right?
'cause-
Everything else flows like it should. It makes sense. It feels like a new gaming experience. You don't need, tutorial 101 or anything like
And
that.
if you want
Just
like one of
jump
the
in.
most memorable gaming experiences of the year, it's a good stop for you.
Yeah, I think it really is one of the weirdest, strangest,
Like the
coolest games this year.
Yeah.
Wow.
I just ordered the strategy guide today because I realized that like once I finish this game, I know there's a bunch of post game stuff that you can do also, and it's like I'm gonna have to do that. Like I'm
Yeah.
enjoying this game so much right now that I'm already like anticipating like, well, I'm gonna need to spend many more hours with this even after I finish it. So I better have the guide to like steer me right.
I think the best thing about it is the game opens up with every time you load it up, it says, what is it, Joe? A Final Fantasy for first time
For fans and first timers.
And I
Yeah.
feel like that's pretty accurate so far. As someone who doesn't care for Final Fantasy, it's pretty inclusive of people who are like,
Yeah.
Like, I'm really enjoying it. It's probably one of my favorite games of the year so far.
Wow. Parentheses, tell a friend, please, for the love of Christ, tell a friend about this game.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for watching this excerpt from the Game Informer Show podcast. You can click right here if you want to subscribe and listen to the audio version of the full show. Full episodes air every Thursday, and they feature Game Informer editors sitting around talking about the biggest reviews, previews. We talk about exclusive impressions of Game Informer's cover stories. We have long-form developer interviews, everything that's great in gaming. So every Thursday, be sure to check it out.